The Parradine 525S is one of those cars that looks like an alternate timeline of automotive history. When you look at its long hood, muscular fenders, and futuristic solutions, it is hard to believe this car actually existed and was ready for production as early as the late 1990s. It had more than 500 horsepower, weighed only around 1,350 kilograms, and was capable of reaching nearly 330 kilometers per hour. Even more remarkably, Parradine planned to completely eliminate traditional side mirrors and replace them with cameras and screens, a solution now used by modern Audi, Honda, and Lexus models, but one that, at the time, seemed almost like science fiction. The problem was that the car cost as much as a Ferrari or Porsche, had no ABS, traction control, or airbags, and was built by a tiny company virtually unknown to the wider world. Only a handful of examples were ever produced, and today the Parradine 525S remains one of the most mysterious British supercars of the turn of the century. This is the story of a man who wanted to build his own Ferrari in a uniquely British way, hand-built, brutally fast, and completely different from everything else on the market. The history of the brand actually began back in the mid-1980s. John Parradine was a British businessman involved in heavy construction and transport equipment, but he was also a passionate enthusiast of sports cars. Like many British constructors of that era, he dreamed of creating his own automobile. In 1985, he founded Deltane Cars and created the Proteus model, an unusual roadster based on Jaguar XJ components. The car stood out thanks to its highly distinctive front end, featuring triple headlights on each side, as well as bodywork inspired by classic British roadsters. The Proteus was offered as a kit car, meaning customers assembled it themselves, but even then it was clear that John Parradine had much bigger ambitions. He was not interested in building simple replicas. He wanted to create a true luxury sports car capable of competing with TVR, Aston Martin, or even Ferrari. Proteus production was extremely limited, and only a few examples were likely built. But the project allowed Parradine to gain experience and establish contacts needed for a much more ambitious undertaking. The next stage was the Parradine Pegasus, the car that was supposed to open the doors to the supercar world for the company. The project appeared in the late 1980s and was officially unveiled at the Geneva Motor Show in 1990. The Pegasus looked like a fully fledged exotic grand tourer powered by a Jaguar V12 engine. The body was made from Kevlar and carbon fiber, which according to many sources made it one of the first production cars to use such advanced composite materials. The construction was based on a tubular space frame chassis, while the luxurious interior was crafted by Callow and Maddox, a company known for working with Bentley and Rolls-Royce. The price was around £92,000, which at the time was an enormous sum of money. Despite that, public reaction was incredible. Parradine reportedly received nearly 400 orders backed by deposits. For a tiny British company, this was almost unbelievable. The French government even offered to relocate production to a new factory near the Magny-Cours circuit. Everything looked like the beginning of a major success story. Unfortunately, the Pegasus project ended in disaster. The outbreak of the Gulf War, financial problems, and political pressure caused production to collapse almost immediately. Around 19 examples were built before the company was forced to shut down operations. John Parradine had to refund customer deposits and return to Britain. For many people, this marked the end of the dream of a British supercar, capable of rivaling Europe's finest automobiles. However, Parradine had no intention of giving up. By the late 1990s, he returned with a new company called JJR Automotive and an even more ambitious project, the 525S. The car was intended to be a modern evolution of the Pegasus. It retained the British character of a hand-built roadster, but stylistically it was far more modern. Influences from TVR, the Dodge Viper, and Italian supercars were clearly visible, yet the car still had a very distinctive silhouette of its own. The long hood, set-back cabin, and wide body gave it the proportions of a classic, brutal Grand Tourer with a massive V8 engine under the hood. The Parradine 525S was officially introduced around 1999, with production beginning at the start of the new millennium. The car's construction was extremely interesting. It was based on a steel tubular frame of Parradine's own design, made from a patented high-strength alloy. The body was constructed from composite materials and plastics, helping keep the weight relatively low. The car weighed around 1,350 kilograms, significantly less than most luxury GT cars of the era. Power was sent to the rear wheels through a 6-speed Tremec T56 manual gearbox, known from cars such as the Ford Mustang and Chevrolet Corvette. The suspension used double wishbones at both the front and rear, while braking was handled by ventilated discs on all 4 wheels. Parradine was not trying to build a luxury car in the traditional sense. This was meant to be a raw, extremely fast machine for drivers seeking brutal thrills behind the wheel. The most important element of the car was naturally its engine. Initially, Parradine offered the 430 model powered by a 4.6-liter V8 sourced from the Ford Mustang. The engine produced around 430 horsepower, already delivering excellent performance. However, the true legend was born with the arrival of the 525S version. The engine was equipped with forced induction and produced around 525 horsepower, along with approximately 625 Newton-meters of torque. That was an enormous figure for the late 1990s and early 2000s. At the time, the car ranked among the most powerful road cars in the world. Interestingly, some sources describe the engine as a proprietary Parradine design, but most indicate it was a heavily modified Ford modular V8 from the Mustang Cobra. The engine was paired with a 6-speed manual gearbox, and the entire car was stripped of virtually all electronic safety systems. There was no ABS, no traction control, and no stability management. The driver was therefore given 525 horsepower, sent exclusively to the rear wheels, without any electronic guardian angels. Performance figures were impressive, even compared to Ferrari and Porsche. The Parradine 525S was said to accelerate from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in approximately 3.8 seconds and reach a top speed of around 328 kilometers per hour. That placed it in the same territory as the Ferrari 550 Maranello and the Porsche 911 Turbo Type 996. The problem was that its competitors offered vastly greater technical support, brand prestige, and established service networks. Parradine was a tiny company building only a few cars each year. In addition, the car had a very demanding character. The short wheelbase, enormous torque, and lack of electronic safety systems meant it could be extremely difficult to control at high speeds. On the other hand, that was exactly what attracted certain customers. The 525S was the opposite of modern electronically managed supercars. It delivered a purely mechanical driving experience and enormous brutality. Many journalists compared it more to the TVR Cerbera than to a Ferrari. One of the most futuristic features of the Parradine was its camera system replacing traditional side mirrors. Today, such technology is gradually becoming standard, but at the end of the 1990s, it looked like something straight out of a science fiction film. The cameras were meant to send images to screens inside the cabin, improving aerodynamics and reducing drag. It was an incredibly advanced idea, but also an extremely risky technological challenge. At that time, image quality, reliability, and legal regulations represented major obstacles. It remains unclear how many cars actually received the fully functional system, but the very concept demonstrates how ambitious the project was. Parradine attempted to create a car of the future with a budget incomparable to Ferrari or McLaren. The project also incorporated special Quantum H4 style doors and a retractable roof system designed by Harvey Wooldridge. Altogether, the 525S looked more like a futuristic motor show prototype than the product of a tiny British manufacturer. The company planned a much larger model family. In addition to the 525S Roadster, Parradine also announced a coupe called the 525SC and a highly unusual two-door wagon named the 525SE Estate. Renderings of these cars looked remarkably bold and demonstrated that Parradine intended to create an entire exclusive supercar brand. The problem was that financial reality brutally crushed those ambitions. The car's price started at around £130,000, placing it directly against the Ferrari 360 Modena and Porsche 911 Turbo. Customers spending that kind of money generally preferred brands with history, prestige, and proven support networks. Parradine had none of those advantages. Production remained extremely limited, and instead of the planned 50 examples per year, only a handful were built annually. The company struggled to survive, but ultimately operations were shut down around 2006 or 2008. Once again, John Parradine had to accept the collapse of his automotive dream. The exact number of Parradine 525S cars produced remains unclear to this day. Most sources state that around a dozen examples of all variants combined were built. Some information suggests approximately 10 to 15 examples of the 525S Roadster may have been completed, although precise records hardly exist. This makes the car extraordinarily rare today. Most people have never seen one in person. Even among enthusiasts of British supercars, the brand remains largely unknown. Paradoxically, that obscurity is precisely what makes the Parradine so fascinating. It is a car from an alternate version of automotive history, a machine that looked capable of becoming a rival to TVR and Ferrari, but practically disappeared before the world had a chance to discover it. Today, finding one for sale is almost impossible. Many examples remain hidden in private collections or rarely appear in public. The value of the Parradine 525S is extremely difficult to determine because these cars almost never appear at auction. When new, they cost around £130,000, which was an enormous amount at the time. Today, their value could be significantly higher due to their extreme rarity. In the collector world, obscure British supercars from the 1990s and early 2000s are becoming increasingly desirable. Cars such as the TVR Cerberus Speed 12, Jaguar XJ220, and Ascari Ecos now command enormous prices. The Parradine is even rarer than most of those automobiles. The problem, however, is that the brand effectively no longer exists, and there is no large collector community dedicated specifically to these cars. Realistically, a well-preserved 525S could today be worth anywhere from around €150,000 to even €300,000, particularly if it retains full documentation and remains in original condition. In the future, values may continue to rise because the number of surviving cars is incredibly small. The Parradine 525S remains one of the most extraordinary British supercars of the late 20th century. It combined the classic brutality of a huge V8 engine with futuristic technological solutions and the craftsmanship of a small specialist manufacturer. It was a car built more with passion than with financial logic. John Parradine created a machine that was extraordinarily ambitious, yet simultaneously doomed to a difficult battle against the giants of the automotive industry. Nevertheless, his project left behind something truly unique. The 525S reminds us of an era in which a single, passionate individual could still attempt to create his own supercar and challenge Ferrari or Porsche. Today, such a project would be almost impossible. That is exactly why the Parradine remains so fascinating. It was not perfect, it was not a great commercial success, and it did not change automotive history. But it was a bold dream turned into reality. And the world no longer produces many cars like that.